Hey, it's Joe Farrow, Geek Toolkit. Welcome to episode 6 of my Home Assistant tutorial series that's going to focus on lighting. This entire dashboard that you see here, we're going to build out most of it from scratch, so don't worry if you don't understand it. Part of this video, I'll go through it. Part of this video, we'll build it up, but there's also key concepts that we have to understand as far as lighting for switches, lighting for smart lights, and then LED strips. How are they the same? How are they different? In this video, this is what it's going to look like. We'll talk about the setup that I have there, that UI, and what I'm using for hardware so that you understand when I control things, what you're looking at. We'll talk about how they appear in Home Assistant. So then we'll go into like the devices, entities, and sensors breakdown and show where these things all show up, what they look like so that you know where to look for and how to actually control them and address them. Then we're going to talk about how to add them into the UI, which is fairly simple and is the beginning thing you would want to do to be able to just take control of them and get them into the UI. So we'll talk about that, basically building out that dashboard. We're going to go to the developer mode to go to more advanced settings and also so that you understand how to debug automations and so on. It's very easy to get the UI for this stuff, but to actually put it into an automation, you have to understand how the services work. It's not that complicated, but for me, it was very unintuitive. When I came to Home Assistant a couple years ago and I was trying to figure out how to control lighting, it just took me a while to really understand or wrap my head around how it works. Now that I have that, I'm going to relay that to you so that you get a really good grasp of how to control lights and make them do whatever you want them to do. We'll move on to scenes, which is a very convenient way to not only control lighting, but also to control your home automation system. And this is really where things get really smart. Then we'll talk about advanced topics like light grouping or light default settings. And then we'll get into closing thoughts. So we can just go over my general take on lighting and give you some tips and ideas for really taking this to the next level. Okay, let's get into it. So this is my user interface. And what I'm going to go over is not only this real quick, but also what you see above and currently right here. So this is me and my one camera. At the very top of this window here is another camera that's facing my lights. One's blue, one's green right now. I did that so that you can match it over the user interface. This room is my makerspace. You'll hear me say makerspace a lot. And maker doorway is the green light, which is above a door behind me. And the blue light is actually over where I do soldering and all my electronics, my actual maker desk. So I just call that maker overhead for this video. The WLED strip is actually, I'm facing it right now. So if you see light coming on my face or if you see light reflecting in the background a rainbow color, that's actually an LED strip that's ahead of me right now. And that's using WLED. And then these are scenes. We'll talk about how to put these together and how to get them in the UI. Notice there's some icons next to a couple of them. We'll talk about that. And then you've got the current here. This is actually how much current my RGB strip is using. So we'll talk a little bit about how to access the sensors off of lighting to actually chart out things like your power usage and so on. This is the Z-Wave switch that's behind me here. This is actually showing up down here. You see Makerspace Z-Wave switch. It's a GM Brighton, nothing really fancy about it, but just so that you know what it looks like. This is my WLED UI. This is, again, the UI for my RGB strip that's going on here. You do use this UI a bit, so if you're not familiar with WLED, it's incredibly powerful. You can see it's very elegant. There's a ton of built-in animations and such for this, but also you do still use this UI a little bit and reference it from Home Assistant for some of these things. Notice here that you see things like police, railway, rain. These are all animation names, rainbow, and so on. We're going to talk about that later and what that looks like in the Home Assistant to actually control these animations. First thing I want to talk about very quickly, how this stuff breaks down. The switch on the wall shows up as a device. So if I type Makerspace, you see GE Jasco products. That is that Z-Wave switch that I pointed to here. Okay. That switch shows up as a device. That's very, very important because that means if I want to activate the switch, I talk to a device. Behind that is a light also, and that shows up as an entity. Smart bulbs show up as an entity also as a light entity. They don't have a device behind them. So don't look for a device for lighting. You just simply look for the entity and that will be where they show up. So let me show you what that looks like. So here's entity and we'll do light.maker. And you can see here, there's maker overhead and maker doorway. They're light.makerspace 2 and 4. This is of the 4 lights in my room. They're Wiz light bulbs, and that's the integration I'm using. And they're in my makerspace. So that's what this looks like as far as the entities. Now notice there's also my Z-Wave switch here as an entity, just like device. But here it shows up as a light. Now that smart switch is a dimmer. So this actually shows up as like a dimmable light with no color or any other features. It can be on, off, and it can set a brightness. It's just something important to understand because it took me a second to understand why my switch was showing up as a light and how to turn on and off the switch and control everything. So now that you can see that you can treat a switch that's for lights as a light, and that works out really, really well. It lets you set brightness, that lets you set on and off values. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new tab and we'll just call it light demo. And we don't need an icon or anything. And cool, now we're starting out fresh. Let's talk about this. I like to do it by entity. I just think it's super, super easy to do this. So let's just type in light and see what our entities are. And we can see that we've got a whole bunch of them, but here are the doorway and overhead. So I'll just click those. What's really cool is the icon changes to the color of the light. So that made it really easy to find here. The Z-Wave switch, we'll add that in too while we're at it. I'm just gonna say continue. We're gonna say add to UI, and there we go. We've got our initial lights and we've got our switch. So let's add a couple other things. Let's add the WLED. We're gonna add that light as well. There's our WLED LED strip that's ahead of me. All right, very, very simple. How do these work? Well, if you click on the bulb turns off. So I clicked on the green one, you see the green bulb went off, and then it turns to white, and the dimmer on the around it goes all the way down. So I'm gonna click on that to get it back up, and then this blue bulb that's in the back corner, we're gonna dim it. So we just drag this around here, and when we let go, you see it dimmed. Now I have a dim blue bulb in the corner. I really like that. I think that gives you a really good feedback of what I'm doing and what's going on now. Now, these bulbs are whiz light bulbs. It's RGB CCT bulbs. So let's talk about that CCT portion and the RGB. If I click on the triple dots in the upper right, I've got a whole color wheel here, and I can smooth it out, and I basically set all sorts of colors. So there I am changing that light bulb in the back right. Let's change this one. It's a little bit easier to see. So we'll change this one here to red, and then we'll go to green. There we go. So that's how we change colors using this UI. The other thing we can do is, of course, set brightness. So let's brighten that bulb up. And we can set brightness here as well. So next thing I want to do is color temperature. So what we're going to do here is, you see the bulb looks fairly white. We're going to change it to that incandescent yellow. Now, my webcam is it's not going to pick up this light very well to show this, but you can see the color changed. Even though it's set to white, it's more of an orangish white. And then we're going to go over to the blue white, and you can see it switched over there. One thing to notice about this, as I'm dragging it, you see the numbers. It says 153 to 454. This is in what's called mireds. This is what it looks like, M-I-R-E-D. A mired is a more linear way of representing color temperature than Kelvin. I said in the last video that they're measured in Kelvin. They absolutely are. When you buy bulbs, they'll talk about Kelvin. But mired is the way that this slider chooses to show it because it's much more linear. Kelvin, a 400 Kelvin difference on either side of a number in Kelvin is going to be visually very different. This gives you something that makes sense. So that's why those numbers are showing up there. I just thought that was an interesting note of how they did that. The other thing I want to show you is at the bottom here, there's effect. And these are the effects from the Wiz Light integration of what's built into the bulbs. This is going to be very similar to WLED. So I can change these to things like daylight and cool white to have them immediately set to a certain color. But I also can go to like TV time, which is like a dim blue, and you see the bulb responds. This is important because when you have a fancy bulb like this, or you're using WLED, setting effects is very powerful, but just understanding what those effects are is the first step to that. Some lights have the ability to tell you how much power is being used by the light, and that could be either in the bulb, on the switch, or in WLED, it could be in the controller. So I'll show you how to add that sensor card just so you can see how much power is being used by your lights if they support it. WLED absolutely supports it. It's very simple to add here. So we're going to add a card, and I'm going to go by entity and type WLED. And then we're going to go to the second one here, the estimated current, and just add this card in. Now this is the default look. It will tell me the current that's being used, but that's not really what I want. I want the nice chart. So I'm going to say pick a different card, and I'll go down to the sensor card here. There's the sensor, and we'll add that in and say save. And now I've got a nice sensor card that shows the charting of how the power usage was for this. I can also do something for more than 24 hours. And now I can see, my lights have been turning on and off, and that's what my current usage is going up and down. It's just a cool way to show your usage, but also to understand that lights show up as devices if they're switches, entities for the lights, but also sensors for things like power usage and other stuff like that. So be aware of that. The next thing I want to talk about is the developer tools breakdown in Home Assistant. Developer tools really give you a lot of insight into how this stuff works and how to use it for automations. This really is a great way to kind of learn on your own and explore and kind of play with different things. So here in developer tools, I'm going to type makerspace to see what I have for entities. And you can see I've got my lights here. There's light.makerspace1. That's one of my 4. And there's the maker doorway one. So now clicking on that, we see those mirrored values of 153 to 454 that we talked about. That was for the color temperature. And then we see the effect list. Now, again, if I want to know what effects I can set that light to, this is a really cool way to look for it and see what's available for everything without having to go through other means. Some of these values are really useful just because you can get the current value. So you can see I can pull my color temperature or my current effect, which is TV time, and then I know what my light's actually set to right now. That's really good when you're trying to pair up multiple smart lights. Here's what the RGB strip looks like under WLED. So I've got light WLED 2, so this is my second of 3 WLEDs. You can see all of my effects here. These are all built into the WLED firmware, so if you have a WLED device, you'll have all of these available. And then it shows you things like brightness and so on. So just another way. Now here's where it gets interesting. If I type WLED as an entity, I get other entities here. So here's estimated current, and I can see things like the max power. This is actually the power supply that I've entered into WLED is 15 amps. So there's other data we can pull off of this. Okay, let's talk about services. Now the real big thing here is when you type light here, you see there's toggle, turn on, and turn off. That's it for lights. When you want to turn on a light and you want it to be red, you actually call the turn on service and you pass in parameters to say red. So let me show you what that looks like. Here's light turn on. Here's a bunch of parameters. One of the parameters is what entity you're going to call the service on. So we're going to call it on, let's see, I think, let's do the maker doorway. So this is the light right behind me here. And we can say the color, the RGB color, and we can do that. And this is going to be like a bracket. Let's see, red, green, blue. So we'll change it to blue. So 00255 is what that would look like. And then I say call service. And now I have a blue light behind me. Now I can set other settings. You set them all at the same time. You set the white level, the brightness, everything, and you say call service and it blasts them. Now say I want to turn that light green. I don't turn off the light and turn it on again. I actually call the service turn on. I just pass green to that service and it will change that light. That was the thing I think that took me the longest time to understand is I was like, how do I change something? Well, you just keep calling turn on it past different values. So instead of RGB color, we're going to do the easy one. We're just going to do the color name. And there's green. And then I can say, and notice there's a couple of different ways to set the color here. There's hue, saturation, X, Y, and so on. I'm going to say call service. And now I have a green light. I just called turn on again. This is how you control lights, by the way. You can toggle, turn off, but then turn on and pass all these parameters. This user interface makes this very, very easy to manipulate. And when we get into automations, I'll show it to you again. So if we haven't gone through it yet, don't worry, we're going to go through it again in the automation section because they built it in there too. This is so much better than it was before this UI existed, where you were putting all this in YAML and it was harder to actually experiment. So super appreciate this UI. This makes Home Assistant so much easier. They've done a great job here. Okay, next thing we're going to do is talk about scenes. Scenes are incredibly important. I talked about this in the last video. In Home Assistant, if I have 4 lights, there's a couple different ways to do this. I can put them in a group. I can put them in a room, and I can control lights by the room. Or I can put them in a scene. And if you put them in a scene, to me, that's just the best, easiest way to manipulate the lights because you can do things like set the lights and other things, like set my lights, my RGB strip, and my television to all behave a certain way on that scene or other things in the room. It doesn't have to just be the lights. So scenes I'm a huge fan of. Let's talk about how to do that and why it's important. Now keep in mind, I'm dealing with 4 smart bulbs, an LED strip, and a spark switch. So I've got 6 things I want to all set for any given scene. So here under configuration, we're going to go to scenes and we're going to create a new one. And for this scene here, we're just going to create a movie scene. And the idea here is that I want 3 of the lights to turn off. I want 1 light to be on dimly. I want my RGB strip to go to a different mode. And I want to turn the switch, I want to make sure it's on. So movie scene, we're going to give it a name. Now we can add a device or an entity. I typically add entities because if there's a device attached, it will promote it up. I'll show you what that looks like. If I type makerspace, here's my Z-Wave switch. If I add that, it gets bumped up to a device here, and I can just go ahead and do my lights here. So I'm going to add, and then I'm going to add the WLED strip in. Now the WLED again got promoted up to a device because there was a device behind it. So I've got all of my stuff for my WLED strip up here. I've got my Z-Wave switch and I've got my lights. Now the way scenes work in Home Assistant is you set everything to the value you want it to be. Now I typically can cheat on this and actually use the app for Wiz to set my lights to be a certain way. You can also do it through here. It's basically whatever is fastest for you. Since I already have it in my Wiz app, you can do that. The important point here is that when you save a scene, whatever everything is set to at that time is what the scene gets set to. So it doesn't matter if you do it in Home Assistant or if you do it through apps or if you just walk over to the wall and hit the switch. When you save that scene, everything will be wherever you save it at. So what I'm going to do here is fast forward here and go through and set all of my lights to what I want them to be. Okay, so what I've done is I've set my WLED to a certain look that I like. I've turned off 3 of the lights in my ceiling, but I've left 1 on dimly by the door. That way, if I need to leave the room for a restroom or something, I've got a little bit of light to guide me over there. Everything else is off. And for the icon, I can just type MDI:, and then I can go to the Material Design Icons website, which is materialdesignicons.com, and I can search for any icons I want and use them. So for movie, you see I have a ton of options. If you mouse over them, it says basically what you want to put after that colon. So this one would be movie, open cog outline, and so on. This one is just simply movie, which is what I'm going to use. So I'm going to do MDI movie. And what that does is give me this little icon here, which is really nice because every time I add this somewhere else, that scene looks really nice and clean. I'm going to call this movie demo to differentiate it between the other movie things that I have. And then I'm just going to say save. I immediately got an alert on my phone. If you haven't had Vocasa, that scene just went over to your Amazon or Google device and is now available. So that's pretty cool. I can actually use voice now to turn this on and off. And I'll talk about that in the next video. But it's one of the reasons I love scenes so much is now I've just integrated that with everything. So how do we test this scene? Well, we can go to our scenes UI here and I'm going to turn everything on. So I'll say makerspace on. I'll hit the play button. And now everything turned on. My lights went to rainbow and all that. And then I made a movie demo scene. So when I click this, you see everything goes down to where it was. What's interesting about scenes is if you don't actually change a light in the scene, it will not change. If it's on, it'll stay on. If it's off, it'll stay off. It only changes everything that it was told to address to the exact state you told it to. Very, very powerful when you get used to it and you start using it a bit. There's one last thing I want to do with scenes. I want to show you how to add the scene to the UI. I haven't shown that yet. So let's do that real quick. We're going to add a card, go to entity, and we'll type scene. And it was movie demo. We're going to add that there. And that's the card. Looks good. I'll say add. There it is. There's an activate button. You hit the activate button and it turns on. I can show you that with this here. So I hit activate. And then you get the icon next to the scene, which is just a really slick way to do this. I hit activate again and it changes. The WLED strip is changing modes when I do that. So you see the estimated current usage go way down because it's a much simpler scene that's going on in the WLED. Let's talk about automations for a second. Automations are very, very simple. First one I want to show you is just the default turn light on at sunset. That way we just walk through how to control these. So we'll say turn light on at sunset. And I would probably have a second one of these that would turn it off at sunrise. This is going to be a sun trigger that is at sunset. And then I could add conditions like what days or whatever. And then down here for actions, we're going to say call service. And we're going to call a service light.turn on. Now you can see all of that UI I was talking about before is where it shows up here. This is exactly, I would fill this out just like we did in the developer tools, which is why I showed that. You can use the developer tools to test things out, and then you can use them here, basically understand what you want to put in all of these. Once they're done, then you can run the automation and actually have it turn the light on or off just to make sure it's affecting the light. And then when that trigger fires, in this case sundown, then the light should turn on. This is a great, common, easy home automation scenario. Okay, so let's do one for that movie scene using the wall mode. I have a video on the wall mode and how to set that up. It's basically just a fancy Z-Wave switch that has scene controllers on it. We'll do wall mode. Okay, so when that wall mode turns on, then how do we set a scene? Well, we say activate scene, and then we can just select it here. So I said movie demo, and I can save that. And now I can actually use that wall mode. When I hit the button, it will go to this movie scene that I'm sitting in right now. Okay, so that was a quick look at automations and automations activating scenes and automations calling services. Those are the two main ways that I actually do stuff with lighting. I want to talk about two advanced topics real quick. One of them is default turn on values. When you call service turn on for your lights, you may not want to sit there and set a whole bunch of things like brightness and temperature and so on. You may just want that light to be a certain value. This default turn on values here is a way to put a CSV file where your home automation configuration is, and then specify for each light what the default turn on value is. I won't demo it here because there's actually a bug in it right now for the current build, but I want you to be aware of it, and I'll link the page in the description so that you can look at it more if that's something that you want to do. The last thing I want to talk about is what's called a light group. Now, a light group uses a Home Assistant concept of groups. And what you do here is you actually edit the YAML and you would put your different lights in a room under a grouping. Then you would control them all as if you had a switch in that room. So for instance, I could put these 4 lights under a group, and then I could say set that group to red or set that group to this temperature, and all of the lights would be treated as one device. It's a really cool way to actually handle lighting if you want to handle it as a single entity. I find myself, when I talk about advanced lighting things, I like to handle my lights individually and have them each do their own thing, unless I'm just doing a very basic thing like turning them on at a certain temperature. And for those, scenes handle all of that for me personally. For your choice, though, groups may make a lot more sense. They're very, very intuitive when you have them set up. So if so, I'll link you to this page here for how to set up a lighting group so that you can go forward with that as well. I want to thank you for watching this episode. I appreciate the feedback. If you have any questions or if something didn't make sense, please ask below in the comments and I will reply to them. I try to reply to every comment that comes in and give you an answer, or at least give you something else to go look at that might help you out. The feedback on this series has been absolutely amazing. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And if you have any ideas where you want me to go for the next episode, let me know in the comments below. My current thinking is I might do vision processing for cameras. That's been requested. If there's other requests, though, let me know. And that way I can start building out my next few episodes and get you guys the information that you're looking for. Thanks for watching. I'm Joe Farrell with Geek Toolkit. Until next time.